Today I'm going to ask the question if Games Workshop might be doing some things backwards. Are they actually changing some in-game rules to fit the points cost that they've given for the gear? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're putting on our tinfoil hats, where I just wanted to suggest that Games Workshop might be doing something strange with the way that they're changing rules and points values. Generally in Warhammer 40k, points are changed to reflect the value of the unit and the gear that they carry. The rules writers make the rules, then they have their best guess at points cost for what the unit's abilities should have, and often tweak it a bit up or down in things like chapter approved for anything that's getting a bit too strong or needs a bit of a buff. There have already been some weird decisions made with points cost in 8th edition, such as say multi-melters and heavy bolters being very expensive comparatively, but there turned out to be a good explanation for that, because it turns out that both weapons are getting a significant buff to make them just a little bit more dangerous in-game. Now the reason I think that Games Workshop might be doing some things backwards a bit is because of their new policy on war gear. Basically almost every single piece of war gear that's 5 points or more now comes in a multiple of 5, rather than say other more random numbers that fall in between the multiples. For example, the multi-melter used to be 22 points for Codex Space Marines, is now either 25 points on vehicles or 20 points on infantry, and the Power Fist and Chainfist were 9 points and 11 points, but now they've both been moved to 10 points. They haven't done this for every single piece of war gear, but it is the vast majority of them. Personally, I did think it was a bit of a strange decision that they'd go for this, as you lose a lot of granularity with determining how good a thing is. I think the main aim of it was to make army building a little bit easier, so if you knew that things are likely to be multiples of 5, 10, 15, 20, you might be able to remember a piece of war gear's cost just that little bit better perhaps. However, I think that this is more theory than real life, as I'm not sure it actually makes it all that much easier, unless you're building every squad in a multiple of 5, which means that your squad might have an odd number of points to start with, so even if you're tacking on very simple multiples of 5 to that, then it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have an even number of points when it all shakes out. You might also take another small piece of war gear that costs less than 5 points, ruining the whole multiple of 5 thing. For example, a Space Marine captain now could take a Power Fist and a Storm Bolter, and he'd wind up costing 93 points, just because even though he costs a multiple of 5 and his Power Fist does, the Storm Bolter kind of ruins it. I think the loss of granularity is quite obvious for certain weapons, particularly anything that was well balanced sort of in between the two different multiples, say anything that costed around about 7 or 8 points, or maybe 12 or 13 points. All of these bits of gear would have to make a tough decision whether or not to take a fairly decent points hike or a fairly decent points cut. For example, I think that Imperial Guard plasma guns were really quite well balanced at 7 points. They were quite good value for what you got, without being super easy auto includes. They then had the decision whether or not to make them to 5 points or 10 points. They opted to go for 5, and now I'd argue that it's pretty undercosted for what it does. If you are wanting infantry squads that are dealing damage, then it's pretty much an auto include, and particularly will mean that the grenade launcher won't see much competitive play, seeing as it costs exactly the same and is basically worse in all scenarios because they made it a multiple of 5 as well. So I'm not sure I'm the biggest fan of the current system, but I thought there was one case in particular that I found quite interesting, and I thought might be a case of Games Workshop having basically made everything a multiple of 5, now wanting to balance some pieces of war gear. The case in point are the Power Fists and the Chainfists, both of which now cost 10 points, where previously the Power Fist cost 9 and the Chainfist costed 11. Chainfists were a bit better than Power Fists previously. They were AP-4 and damage 2, both of which were upgrades, I think, on the D3 random damage of the Power Fist, which is worse against the very common 2 wound infantry, and of course the Power Fist was AP-3 rather than AP-4. When they changed the points cost at the start of 9th edition in chapter approved, both of these went to 10, so it meant in units like Terminator squads, if you could take a Chain Fist instead of a Power Fist, then you basically should, because it was free and flat better. Now however, we've seen a leaked datasheet for the new Terminator squad, and it looks like they've changed this around a bit. Power Fists are still AP-3, but now they have the advantage of being damage 2, rather than the Chain Fist, which is now damage D3. They've essentially swapped these two values around, and it means that Power Fists do have a bit more of a niche now over Chain Fists when hitting 2 wound infantry. I honestly think that this was a bit of a surprising rules change, to be honest. Chain Fists have basically always been Power Fists just +1, but now there's some trade-offs, which I think they've just introduced literally because they've made them the same number of points. I honestly think it might be a case of the games designers deciding that everything is going to be in multiples of 5, so they realise that they have to shift around these very similar pieces of war gear to keep them both fairly relevant. As a result, I wonder whether or not other similar style weapons such as this might have a bit of a rules rebalance as well. Maybe things like Imperial Guard grenade launchers will get a bit of a buff in their next codex, just due to the fact that they've gone up to 5 points over 3 for what appears to be quite arbitrary reasons. So let me know what you think about the theory, which I do admit is pretty much entirely based off this one example. It'd be interesting to see if we see anything else like this when the new Space Marine and Necron codexes materialise. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to the channel, and if you have been watching a lot of the content recently, I'd just like to mention that the channel has a Patreon page down in the video description. If you have been enjoying a lot, then it's what keeps the videos coming, so any support is greatly appreciated. A massive thank you to my current patrons for helping keep this channel going. In any case, thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.